Next, we want to go in and add some color to our particles. The way to do that is either through initialization at birth or modifying using some kind of parameter through the ice tree executed per frame. Initially, I'm just going to give the particles a color. I'm going to assign them a random color by looking up a randomize by gradient. And under particle modifiers, we find the compound randomized color by gradient. RGB output connected to the RGB per particle input of the emit from surface compound. And if I look at the gradient, just click in my viewport here, we can see that we're getting red, green, and blue colors randomly assigned to the particles themselves. We don't really want red, green, and blue, so I'm going to right-click and delete one of the markers, and I'm just going to define a gradation between, say, if I hold down Control, it actually acts as a grayscale slider, between white on one end and between 75% gray on the other. Actually, I'll take this color down to maybe 86%. Okay, so that takes care of the particle color. It still doesn't look like much when we render it. Of course, if I just draw a render region, we just get a lot of particles overlapping shaded with Phong. So not too impressive, but we'll be changing that pretty quickly. At this point, you would start to kind of branch out into whether or not you wanted to shade with mental ray or with viewport shading, real-time or hardware shading. If you wanted to shade the particles using hardware shading, sort of in this texture decal view, if you wanted to do sort of real-time or captures like this, we could continue modifying the shader in ICE. What I'm going to do is build some shaders based on gradation that use colors mapped over a particle's age. We're going to take from birth to death, and we're going to distinguish where our particles become more or less transparent. And because we have a lot of overlapping particles, the areas where particles are less grouped by neighbors will be wiped out pretty quickly. They'll be made transparent. We're going to use a modify particle color compound. So if we look up any compound containing the word color in it, we have the modify particle color. I want to plug it in after I've turbulized the velocity, so I'll pull it into the graph, and I'll actually just drag it over this ice tree root and plug it into the empty port 4. And if I open up the compound, right away we can see we're using another gradient, and if I lock it, we're using a gradient over the age of the particles. So the particles actually become green very early in their lifetime. If I map instead over the age percentage, you can see how the particle color is evenly distributed between 0 and 100% of the particles birth through their death. We're not really interested, though, in setting particle color. One of the nice features of the modify particle compound, the color compound, is that you can use the source parameter, in our case the age a particle might be along its life, and we can use that to modify, in our case, particle alpha. So the particles now retain their original color I had described, and instead of using the RGB color sliders, in which color doesn't even matter here, you can even turn all the colors to black, you'll see it has absolutely no effect, I can now work the alpha channel on one end and start to fade out some of these particles. If you look later on in the particle life, same thing. If I start to fade out the alpha towards the death, we start to get the individual smoke runs of the particles. So again, you see how many particles are actually culled out just from the process of removing alpha. You can bring that alpha down very low. To have it create some pretty fine looking effects. I'll probably raise it a little bit higher. Again, once you start seeing the effect, you can see the individual runs where the particles are actually deleted. You may want to go in and start to adjust the particle scale and the velocity some more. So I could even take the particle strength on the velocity. Could lower that a little bit more. You notice the particles become a little wispier, and decrease the scale. So next I'm going to look at pushing the particles away. To do that, I'm going to use a get forces compound that adds together the result of the vector forces. If you look in the forces menu, we've got a number of compounds dealing with vectors and how they affect the particle position. The add forces compound gathers together all of the vector force compounds and outputs them into the ice tree. So it's just a way of cleaning up the execution of forces in the ice construction stack. So I need room for the add forces compound, and I'm actually going to add it before I turbulize the particle velocity. I'll add in the forces, and I'll bring in a wind force. But the easier way to bring in a wind force in XSI is not to bring in the compound. It's actually easier to bring in a control object from the older particle days of XSI. So if I bring in an actual wind icon this way, actually have to figure out where it is. There it is. I could actually take that wind icon and aim it in the direction I want the cigarette to blow. So I'll kind of turn the wind in this direction here. Again, it doesn't matter that I'm overlapping angles. Do something like that. So I want to use that wind vector as a force. So F3 to bring up my little mini explorer, and I'm going to bring wind in. And wind outputs its value, its direction vector, as a force. So now when I work these particles, I should be able to click on the wind get data node and control the wind velocity and strength to push the particles in the direction I need. If I increase the strength, you'll notice I start to nudge them more along the wind vector. I may need to go in and add more particles to fill in some of these gaps, or again, even increase the particle size. Again, you don't want any overlaps because you want the volume shader to really be able to cut out of these volumes. So if need be, you can thicken up the particle size to make sure that the shaders work when you do apply the mental ray shaders. But now I'll keep this fairly low.